Welcome to Inner City Media, where we share stories of true crimes from the past and present. These stories are not to be glorified, but to be measured as cautionary tales. We'll take a deep dive into the minds of those accused and convicted of heinous crimes, and the victims who suffered an untimely death. Nobody would have looked at a picture of Richard Jameswhite and thought he was a dangerous murderer. In the 1990s, the 19-year-old was only 5 foot 5 inches tall and perceived by many to be 13 years old. Because of this, the streets had given him the nickname Babyface. Don't let that fool you, because he was one of the most notorious killers in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and abroad. As a child, Richard lived with his grandmother and older brother, Glester. On January 28, 1991, Glester was shot and killed on Cadden and Ocean Avenues. It was a huge loss to young Richard, to the point where he would just sit and stare at the ceiling in complete silence. It wasn't long before Richard's grandmother relocated. She moved to a nicer home in the suburbs, hoping that Richard would benefit from it and begin walking the narrow path. However, Richard couldn't seem to let go of the untimely death of his brother. He frequented his old neighborhoods in search of getting answers to his brother's death. In the process of this, he joined the Parkside Gang, which was notorious for robbing other drug dealers. In February 1991, at 17 years old, Richard was arrested for his first attempted murder of 19-year-old Kevin Smith. Word traveled that Kevin Smith was involved with the murder of Richard's older brother, and he wasted no time in seeking revenge. He shot the victim several times in a barbershop on Lenox Road in Flatbush before making his escape. Jameswhite had made bail for $5,000, but he jumped bond, and law enforcement would not make contact with him for several years. While on the run, Richard became more of a savage. On April 16, 1993, he was suspected of being one of 5 gang members that robbed an armored car for $101,000. A deadly exchange of gunfight ensued between the Parkside Gang and the guards of the armored truck. Tragically, transit authority worker Robert Singleton was killed in the process by a stray bullet while on a coffee break. Police raided Richard's apartment, finding 2 automatic weapons and 3 assault rifles. These weapons matched ballistics from the heist. They found a collection of movies ranging from Dirty Harry to Scarface and The Godfather. Police believe these movies helped further fuel his madness. Till this day, nobody knows who killed Singleton, but Jameswhite will be labeled as a suspect. It's believed he killed 6 more men between 1992 and 1993. The motive behind these killings were said to not only be acts of revenge, but also a challenge to himself. He was determined to up his murder rate and out-kill even the most grisly murderers. Though the reasons for these murders are continuously debated, revenge, drug disputes, and competition caused him to shoot without care and rack up bodies while evading New York City police. The last of those 6 killings was a double homicide. Richard was spotted sitting on the handlebars of a bike while being chauffeured by a friend. He held 2 guns, 1 in each hand, and took aim after spotting Ryan Kane Bridge, 18, and Dotson Farmer, 21, at St. Paul's Court and Ocean Avenue in Flatbush. He fired both weapons, killing the 2 men and wounding 2 others. As you can imagine, many more murders in the area were linked to him, but there wasn't enough evidence for law enforcement. The number of men he actually killed will remain unknown. In reality, all of them were in relations to the murder of his brother, Glester. A childhood friend said, he continued, He was a good kid that turned bad, looking for revenge. He had grown to embrace killing and hurting others. One of Richard's friends had introduced him to a voodoo witch doctor. She had given him a spiritual bath and assured him that no one would be able to bring harm to him. She had also given him beads to wear around his neck and wrist and told him it would make him invincible to his enemies. On September 3, 1993, Richard and two other gang members went to an apartment in Canarsie, Brooklyn, attempting to rob drug dealers. Instead, they came across a 32-year-old mother and 6 children ranging from ages 2 to 17 sitting on a stoop of a house on East 77th Street. Richard and his goons all aimed their guns at the mother and children and forced them into the house. After the victims were bound and gagged, Richard's goons both raped 2 teenage girls. They then ransacked the house searching for valuables, took what they could, then left. 2 days later, sex crimes detectives scoured the area with the 2 rape victims in the backseat. The 2 women spotted Richard Jameswhite, then pointed him out. As detectives attempted to rush toward Richard, he quickly pulled out a semi-automatic and fired at the officers. Officers returned fire, but Richard managed to get away. On September 11, 1993, Richard had gotten into a fight with a man and flashed a gun. The man was shot in the leg by one of Richard's goons. NYPD officers heard the shot. They were a block away. They proceeded to chase Richard and his accomplice, but did not prevail. An officer spotted Richard September 13, 1993 in a stolen Acura Legend on Rockaway Avenue in Brooklyn, where they exchanged gunfire. Richard lost one of the back wheels in the high-speed chase of up to 80 miles per hour and, unbelievably, managed to escape once again. September 23, 1993, his grandmother, Sally Ann, appeared on the news, begging for her grandson to turn himself in because she was concerned about his safety. She also disclosed that ever since his brother died, Richard was heavily depressed and never the same. He would get angry over little things and never talk. She also stated that Richard was never arrested until after his brother died. Catching the man was difficult mainly because he would flee to other cities to hide out after he committed a murder. Packets of him and the gang were sent out to nearby states, main cities, and even across the border to Toronto. Police tried desperately to capture Richard and bring him to justice. At that point, he had killed 6 men and wounded another 15, all using the same weapon, a gun. A year later, on April 28, 1994, Richard Babyface Jameswhite and Devin Ricky T. Brown, 24, were found in Georgia. The men had an altercation with Anthony Macklin and his fiancée after a minor car accident. Being that Richard was a wanted man, he tried talking himself out of the situation by apologizing and told Anthony Macklin not to call the police. Jameswhite and Brown even offered to pay for the damage, but Macklin was hostile. Macklin's fiancée wanted to leave, but he was determined to get the cops involved. Once Richard realized Anthony wasn't willing to comply, he removed a gun from his waist and unloaded several shots into his torso. Anthony Macklin later died from his wounds. Richard Babyface Jameswhite was labeled extremely dangerous as well as prone to killing at even the slightest provocation. Nobody would think that this man with the face of a young boy would end up being the one that brutally killed them. Richard was caught the same day of the brutal slaying of Anthony Macklin. He was found with 2 guns and a switchblade knife on him. Unknown if he was in Georgia to start a new life or to just change venues for his shooting sprees. I guess we'll never know. On December 12, 1994, Richard Babyface Jameswhite and Devin Ricky T. Brown were both sentenced to life in prison. The only direction a negative mind goes is down. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Inner City Media. Salute.